Chapter 3, Section 7, Equations. So all through this chapter we have learned techniques for factoring, and now what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to use that factoring to solve a type of equation that's called a quadratic. So to solve an equation using factoring, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to set everything equal to 0. So you're going to have an equation. Make sure you move everything to the left or right hand side. I always say the left hand side. And set it equal to 0. And then what you're going to do is you're going to factor the left hand side by any methods that apply, and we've learned all of the methods by now. And then you're going to use the zero product property, and this is the only thing that's new as far as this section is concerned. Because what's going to happen is when you get the left side factored, you're going to have two factors, something like maybe x plus 3 times x plus 2, and then it's going to be set equal to 0. So that's what it should look like at this step. And so the zero product property states that if you have two things multiplied together, a times b, and it's set equal to 0, then that's true if and only if either a or b or both are 0. And so what you're going to do is you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the x plus 3 and set it equal to 0, and then we'll take the other factor of x plus 2 and set it equal to 0, and we'll continue to solve. So we'll minus 3 from both sides, and we'll get x is equal to negative 3, and then we'll minus 2 from both sides, and we'll get x is equal to negative 2. And so the difference in what we've been doing in this chapter is we would normally stop here after we factor. But now that we have an equation, we need to solve, and so we have to use the zero product property to continue to solve and see what x can possibly be. This is a very important technique. You will be using it a lot, so make sure you learn how to number 1 factor and number 2 solve an equation. So let's try this. Notice that these two equations, these two examples are already set equal to 0, so step number 1 is taken care of for you. So all you need to do is concentrate on the left hand side initially and factor. So we have a trinomial on the left hand side, and your leading coefficient's 1. It is not a pattern, and there's nothing in common. So make sure you go through all those things. Make sure you realize that you have a trinomial and all the possibilities that you can go through with a trinomial, such as there's nothing in common, and it's not a pattern, and your leading coefficient's 1. So to use the leading coefficient as 1 technique, you open up 2 sets of parentheses and you decide on your signs. The signs are going to be different, and I know that because of this second sign here. And so if it's negative, the signs are going to be different. Then I'm going to take this x squared and split it into x times x, and I'm going to think, what can I multiply together to get 12, but add together to get negative 11. The factors of negative 12 that will add up to give me negative 11 are going to be negative 12 and 1. So the negative will go with the 12, and the positive will go with the 1. Alright, so we factored it, and now we're going to use that new zero product property, which says to take each one of these factors and set them equal to 0. And continue to solve. So we'll minus 1 from both sides, and we'll add 12 to both sides. So there are your answers. X is negative 1 and x is equal to 12. Now, one thing you need to realize is when you're dealing with a quadratic, you will have an x squared term, which means that it's a second degree polynomial, and you will have 2 answers. So when you solve these quadratics, you will have 2 answers. Okay, let's look over here. We have a trinomial. There's nothing in common. It is not a pattern, and my leading coefficient is not 1. So this means I'm going to do bottoms up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the 20 times the negative 3, and so we'll have x squared plus 7x minus 60. And then we'll factor this new trinomial, And the second sign's negative, so I'm going to have a plus and a minus, and I'm going to split my x squared into x and x. And so we need to think, what can we multiply together to get negative 60, but add together to get 7. So let's just start with factors. We have a negative 10 and 6, and that's going to give us a negative 4. So we know those are not going to be the factors. What about 12? If we do 60 divided by 12, that's going to give us 12 and 5. So if I do a positive 12 and a negative 5, that should give me that positive 7. So the 12 is going to go with the plus, and the negative is going to go with the 5. Alright, so remember we're doing bottoms up. My father drinks Red Bull. So we did the multiplication and we did the factoring. Remember there's 5 steps, we've only done 2, so now we've got to divide out what we multiplied in, which is that 20. So we'll have to reduce, so 12 over 20 will reduce by 4, which is going to give us 3/5. And 5 over 20 will reduce by 5, which is going to give us 1/4. And then the last step is to bring up, so we'll have 5x plus 3 times 4x minus 1. Alright, so the factoring is done, but since we have an equation, we have to continue on and solve. So we're going to take each one of these, set them equal to 0, and solve. So when we solve this, we're going to minus 3 from both sides. And we'll have 5x is equal to negative 3. And if we divide by 5, we get x is negative 3/5. Over here, if we add 1 to both sides, we'll have 4x is equal to 1. Divide both sides by 4, and we get x is equal to 1/4. And there's your 2 answers. Alright, so let's try again. Here we have a trinomial, and there is a 2 in common, but I don't want my leading coefficient to be negative. One thing is when you factor, you don't ever want that leading coefficient to be negative, so we can always factor out a negative 1, or in this case, there would actually be a negative 2 that's in common. So let's factor out a negative 2 to take care of that negative sign in front. So we'll have an n squared plus 5n minus 6 equals 0. And then we have a trinomial in here. There's nothing else in common. My leading coefficient's 1, so we'll factor accordingly. Open up 2 sets of parentheses. Their signs are going to be different. Split the n squared into n times n, and think, what can we multiply together to get 6, but add together to get 5, and that's going to be 6 and negative 1. So the 6 will go here, and the negative 1 will go here. Now, from here, we need to set each factor equal to 0. Well, remember I told you that if you have a quadratic, you should have 2 answers. Well, down here, we have 3 factors. So if we take those 3 factors and set them equal to 0, and that's the zero product property, you got to take each factor and set it equal to 0. What's going to happen is negative 2 equal to 0, that's not true, so we can go ahead and just throw that away. And then we continue on with a negative 6 on both sides, and a plus 1 on both sides. So these are going to be your 2 answers. Alright, let's try again. We have a trinomial. There is nothing in common, but it is a pattern, I think. So this pattern will normally factor into, it's a trinomial square, which will normally factor into a binomial square. And if you take the square root of 16x squared, you're going to get 4x. And you take the square root of 49 and you're going to get 7. But since I need those 2 factors, for the time being, what we're going to do is we're going to expand the binomial and set it equal to 0. So if we take each one of these and set it equal to 0, here you're going to get x is equal to 7 over 4, and here you're going to get x is equal to 7 over 4. So you're thinking, well, that's the same answer. It is, but it's called a multiplicity factor, and so your answer is x is equal to 7/4 with a multiplicity factor of 2. We'll discuss more about that in Math 112 if you take that. Alright, 2 more. So this is something that we have not seen. If you'll remember, your first step is to get it set equal to 0. Well, in every problem that we've come to thus far, they've been set equal to 0. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens when it's not set equal to 0. Well, the first thing you want to do on this particular problem is, what I would do is I would simplify the parentheses. So we'll have 9a squared plus 9a. And then you can minus 4 from both sides, and when you do that, you're going to get 9a squared plus 9a minus 4 is equal to 0. Alright, so now you would need to factor this, and you would think that this is a perfect square trinomial, but it's not, and I know that because this is a negative sign. Remember, in your perfect square trinomial, you've got to have a plus sign here. So instead, what this is a trinomial with a leading coefficient of not 1, so you have to do bottoms up. So we're going to multiply the 9 times the negative 4 and get a negative 36. And we're going to factor this. Signs are going to be different. Split the a squared into a, and think, what can we multiply together to get a negative 36, but add together to get a 9. If we do 36 divided by 12, we get the 12 and 3, and that's it. So that's going to be a positive 12 and a negative 3. So the 3 is going to go here, and the 12 is going to go here. But remember, we're doing bottoms up, so you have to divide that 9 back out and reduce. So we'll have a plus 12 over 9 will reduce by 3, so that's going to be 4/3. And 3 over 9 will reduce by 3 again, so that's going to be 1/3. And then bottoms up, so we'll have 3a plus 4 and 3a minus 1. Take each one of these and set them equal to 0. And solve. So here we're going to have a is equal to negative 4/3. And here we'll have a is equal to positive 1/3. Okay. Moving over here, again, I'm going to simplify this left-hand side, so I'm going to fold this out. So I'm going to have x squared plus 9x minus 1x minus 9 is equal to 11. And you can go ahead and combine like terms, so we'll have x squared plus 8x minus 9 equals 11. But then we got to get it set equal to 0, so we're going to bring the 11 over here to the left. So we'll have x squared plus 8x minus 20 is equal to 0. And now we're ready to factor. So we'll have 2 sets of parentheses. Signs are going to be different. Split the x squared into x, and think, what can I multiply together to get negative 20, but add together to get an 8, and I'm thinking 10 and negative 2. So the 10 will go here, and the 2 will go here, and this is just regular factoring because your leading coefficient was 1, so now I'm ready to take these 2 factors and set them equal to 0, and solve. Alright, so again, this is solving equations. So remember, once you factor, go ahead and continue to solve and figure out what x is equal to. So what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to complete these numbers on page 170, and if you have problems, bring them into class.